Welcome back to the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. I'm joined now by Peder Zane, the editor of RealClearInvestigations. Peder, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Maggie.
So today we're going to discuss one of your recent articles you wrote for RealClearPolitics, along with a few articles that we've aggregated on the site regarding things going on with China, where you've kind of seen a trend and you guys are posting those articles to give people the information that they may need. Let's start things off with your article. Your article, Why AI's Siren Song is So Hard to Resist, discusses how we've transformed with our devices and seek out less hassle, something that AI seems to be providing very well. So since AI is meeting this basic human nature, can you talk a little bit about why you think this was an important subject to delve into and what we need to know and discuss?
Sure. So I write a column every other week for RealClearPolitics, and one of the challenges is, especially with so many things that are in the news that lots of people are writing about, is what can I say that other people aren't? And honestly, that's often hard to do, and I fall short of that. But I have noticed in journalism, unfortunately, there's really been a trend towards just repeating a message and not so much saying something that's new and interesting, but that is just amplifying a narrative that people want. I think if you read a lot of columns, you'll see how much they just seem to sort of repeat other people's talking points. So I read an article in Wired magazine when I was doing our links for RCI, because we not only produce original journalism, but we aggregate terrific journalism from many other outlets. And Wired did a story about the rise of AI romantic partners, which was sort of, I hadn't heard of. Have you heard about this?
No, and I'm kind of thankful that I haven't.
But they have, if you remember the Joaquin Phoenix movie, Her, or there's a new movie which I just saw, Companion. So it's this idea that AI, as we know, Siri and Alexa can interact with us in certain ways. And that's probably getting better and better. And what Wired said is that perhaps 20% of American adults have actually gone to AI sites that offer romantic partners. Doesn't mean they all have romantic partners or there was just a small number, but it struck me as fascinating. And I have for years been following a lot of the concern that we have about technology in general, and technology leading to loneliness, the death of conversation, that we are interacting much more with our phones and our devices than we are with each other. And I've heard so many people decry this. I don't think it's a healthy thing either. But what I don't hear people saying is, why is this happening? Okay, so years ago, I wrote a book with a genius professor at Duke University named Adrian Bejan, and I detailed his discovery of the constructal law in my column. But the basic idea is that everything in nature moves to have more freedom and more access to the world around them. And we, human beings, as part of nature, are informed by this law as well. And so what I extrapolated was that we may not like the fact that machines seem to dehumanize us in some way and make us more attached to inanimate objects than animate objects. But the question is why? And I think that the constructal law that Bejan discovered provides part of this answer. And just as water and lightning and trees and everything around us sort of moves in order to increase freedom, that we have this same imperative in some ways. We also have minds and free will, so we're not quite as controlled. But I thought that it shed some interesting light on why something that very smart people say is a bad and dangerous trend continues to proliferate. And I think most of our viewers would probably say, geez, I don't know if this is a good idea, but I'm sure there's going to be more romantic partners in the future, AI romantic partners, than less. And so what I hope to add to the conversation was this law of physics that would help explain how we as rational creatures, supposedly with free will, are often guided by physics and forces of nature to act in ways that some people would say is against our self-interest, but in fact, we see it as being in our self-interest in a lot of ways.
No, I mean it's interesting. Obviously, you wonder what this means for the future of like real human connection, but even just the baseline of artificial intelligence where people, so and so is part of the iPad kid generation and now people are being like what is going to happen with regards to the AI generation. This is almost then taking things a step further and wondering what's going to happen with real human connection with regards to the AI generation.
I mean, and I think you see this with the declining birth rates around the country. It's very interesting. Darwin, I'm not a scientist, but I mean, Darwin would have suggested that as we have more wealth, we would in fact have more children, that our imperative to pass on our DNA would mean that, gee, the richer I am, the more I'm going to try to make more copies of me, a la Elon Musk, right? But in fact, what you see is when you have prosperity, when you have freedom in some ways, people have fewer children. And they have fewer children in part because of the demands and expense, the emotional demands, and so forth. But I think also part of it is that you want to invest more in the children that you have so they themselves can, to put it in physics terms, flow more easily across the landscape. That was less of an issue back when everybody lived on farms in small towns and having 10 kids was an advantage. Now it can be a disadvantage, but I think what Adrian's work shows is that Darwinian imperative is actually less important than the imperative to move more freely and have access. And that often leads us to have fewer children. And I'll tell you one interesting thing too, is that a lot of the feedback I got, because I said, kids can be a hassle. I have, children myself and I love my children. And how many people agreed with that statement? Okay. And I don't think, honestly, I think my children are a blessing, but I think there really has been a movement towards people saying, I want to do certain things and children get in the way of that, without thinking about all the other emotionally complex rewards that they have. And those emotionally complex rewards, if you think about you as a parent, like having to give in, having to sacrifice, those are things that we for a long time thought made us more human. This is fulfilling my human experience. Dealing with tragedy and setbacks is actually, overcoming hard things is part of what makes us human. I think that we are, and it makes sense to some level, moving to a world where we're going to reduce those things. I don't need that. What do I need any setback for? What do I need any limit on my autonomy? And I think that is a natural urge, as much as the poets and philosophers might say that it's dehumanizing.
No, it's interesting. AI just provides that ease that some people, you hope to find ease with a future partner in real human interaction. But if that's becoming increasingly difficult, maybe people would turn to AI. Hopefully we're not seeing more and more people turning to AI relationships, but it's definitely an interesting trend to look into, and I appreciate you for shedding some light on that. Do we want to switch gears over to some of the other aggregated pieces on RealClear? All right, perfect. So let's look at some of the other pieces that we've shared on the site regarding China. We're going to start first with a Washington Post article discussing Chinese hackers hitting a wider range of U.S. targets. The article highlights that hacks from suspected government actors have gone up significantly. Why do you think that this is something that we really need to take notice of?
So one of the things, as you know, we every day at RealClearInvestigations, just as our sister sites, RealClearPolitics, Defense, Health, we aggregate links to terrific work in our own area, which is investigative and deep dive reporting that are done by other outlets. And then one of the things that we try to do is, because we're reading dozens, scores of articles every day, is try to see if there are patterns, like what's consistently being reported that's telling a larger story. Each piece is is a part, fits together with other things. And one of the things that's been clear for quite a while is, we are basically in a Cold War with China. And it's a war. It's not a competition. And they are, in particular, taking aggressive and illegal actions against us in various ways. What I don't know is maybe the United States is doing the same thing in China, and that is getting much less reporting. But there has been very strong reporting from various outlets. The hacking story is basically that China has now not just empowered state agencies, but private actors, private companies that are probably aligned with the communist regime to hack into and disrupt many American outlets. There was a story from the previous week that we also had highlighted where they'd broken into a National Guard unit in one state for over a year. So it's this constant illegal action by the Chinese that you don't hear as much about. You hear about competition with China and tariffs, but you're not as aware that they are really aggressively attacking us in important ways.
Yeah, another Wall Street Journal article discusses how the Chinese military has been flexing its power in the Pacific, showing China expanding its reach in the area. And obviously the US has had to respond to some degree. It kind of brings up the question about Taiwan, which has been such a topic of contention for some time. So how could what the article quotes says, rehearsals for invasion, get the US involved in a China conflict? And what would it say if we didn't respond to their so-called flexing?
That's a great question, and it's beyond my pay grade to say what we should do or shouldn't do. But I think that there's really three legs to this. One is you have these illegal activities by the Chinese. Two, you have these, quote, legal actions, which are just they have a military, we have a military, and how incredibly aggressive they have been, at least since the Obama years. If you remember, there was lots of disputes about South Sea Islands that they were South China Sea Islands that they were creating and whatnot. So to be aware of that, we might resurface a story that Richard Bernstein, the late Richard Bernstein, a great journalist for us, wrote about war game plans for Taiwan and how incredibly difficult it would be for the United States and expensive to counter or repel anything like that. But you have the hacking, which is illegal. You have the military, which is sort of legal. And then a third story that we had linked to was about biotech. So the other aspect of the emerging Chinese threat that we just need to think about and know about is they are making tremendous strides, to their credit, in advancing technology, advancing the discovery and production of pharmaceuticals, obviously also with their military, with technology, and computers and so forth. And one of the things that we want to do at RCI is bring together links that themselves seem to talk to each other. And we also do that in our newsletter, which I would hope that everybody would subscribe to, which then even more intentionally groups links together that seem to be telling a story. I just think that our politics is so consumed with Democrat versus Republican and scandal, all of this stuff on Epstein and whatever. And there's actually really significant things going on. I'll tell you one quick anecdote. My wife and I took a trip to the Baltic states a couple of years ago, and we talked to people in Latvia, Lithuania, and they were, as this is when the Ukraine war was in its first year, they were like, thank God for the United States and NATO. This is the only thing that's keeping us safe. And I was just saying to myself, man, I feel sorry for these people that they're relying on us on some level, who are so unserious in many ways about what's going on in the world and the things that we choose to talk about at a time of growing Chinese threat, not sure what's going on with Russia and Iran, some coverage of the debt and the deficit, but we have consequential problems. And one of the things we try to do, in addition to reporting on all the stuff people are talking about, but is to highlight work that is also, which was a real tradition of journalism, is this is what we ought to be thinking about as well. There is a gatekeeper role that we serve, and we have that role because we get paid to spend 10 hours a day thinking about this stuff, to report back to people about what we, as interested, concerned people, think is important. That's our news judgment. And a lot of that has been devalued by the growing bias of the press. But at its best, that gatekeeper role is important, not as a gatekeeper, that's probably not the right word, but as people who get paid to look into things that you would probably be interested in if you weren't being an accountant, a doctor, a truck driver, whatever. That's really our function. We're reporters. We go out, we see what's going on, and we tell you. We're like scouts in the army, and so I think that's an important function, especially related to China.
Yeah, that final article you mentioned was from Bloomberg. Is there anything you'd like to leave people with as we wrap things up?
Well, I just would encourage you to come to our site where we, like I say, aggregate 8 news stories a day from media outlets across the spectrum, but it's all investigative work and deep dive work. It's work that we think, merits your time. And I hope you would subscribe to our newsletter, which then features what we consider to be the best stories of the week. So of those 35 or 40 links that we provide, here are the 5 stories that we think were the most impactful, as well as highlighting our own work, which we continue to produce and are very proud of.
Yes, it's definitely always fantastic to read and get a better understanding of everything that's going on across our country and the world and all that jazz. So, Peder, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Maggie. It's been a pleasure, as always.
That was it for the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. I'll see you next time.